Hi, all. Welcome back to the channel. So today we're actually going to look at AI ethics, and AI ethics is a really, really important concept within AI. So AI ethics refers to the principles, guidelines, and values that shape how artificial intelligence systems are designed, developed, and used responsibly. So if you think, that you're just going to develop an AI system, and not have, principles and guidelines and values that actually shape the AI, how they're actually designed, developed, and used. You could actually get yourself into an awful lot of problems. So you want to kind of avoid different kinds of problems because if you look at it as AI ethics and what they kind of cover, they talk about fairness and bias. Okay, so reduce discrimination, use diverse representative data, and audit systems for bias. So you don't want bias within your AI system. Um, Ethics also talks about transparency and explainability. So, you know, many AI systems they operate as black boxes, but how can we actually explain how decisions are made? How can the users understand how an actual, it came to an actual certain prediction? It also kind of covers privacy and data protection. And if you work in any large organization, this is going to be one of the most crucial parts of any system. So, how is the data collected? Whether the users have given consent? How securely is the data actually stored? They're, you know, often referred to as PII data within an actual sort of system. And AI is no actual different because if you were developing any other type of system, you'd have to have privacy and data protection included. Then you also have accountability and responsibility. Who's actually responsible for the system? Safety and security. Would it perform reliable? Would it not be causing harm to anybody? Would it be protected from misuse or hacking? And this one here, we're going to kind of have a look into in another video. We're going to dive into that. You've got kind of control, and you've got social and economic impact. So what actually kind of happens when there's job displacement and wealth concentration and access to AI benefits. And so basically, it says that AI is powerful and widespread, and ethical considerations help ensure technology aligns with human values and fundamental rights, not just efficiency and profit. So that's kind of critically important that any of these kind of systems and AI systems that you basically build, they have all of these considerations and guidelines and guardrails basically in place. So what I've kind of done is I've asked ChatGPT to help us kind of build an actual sample file here. Now, ChatGPT, I said, give me a few examples of um, systems basically that use ethics within Python, so I can run a kind of small script, because here we're not building out a kind of a full system. Simply, what we're basically going to do is actually have a like a kind of proof of concept. But you can sort of see that I've kind of amalgamated all of these systems into one. I've taken these kind of few programs and I've basically put them into one. So you know, um, program one sort of talks about show ethics as a measurable fairness, right? So group disparity. This example measures where the classifier treats two groups differently, right? So using democratic or equal. Um, Program two kind of goes through, and talks about simple mitigation and how to use thresholds per group to reduce disparity. Okay, so is it actually fairness aware thresholding? It's not always legally, ethically acceptable in every concept, but it's a clear demonstration of ethics as constraints and trade-offs. So you can kind of look at the kind of code here and sort of actually sort of see what's kind of going on here. Now, this is very kind of data scientist driven. This one here is kind of data scientist driven, but I think the kind of important part that you just have to kind of remember is that it's a simple mitigation on how to use different thresholds per group to reduce disparity. That's all it actually, the actual kind of differences between the group. Program three talks about, can you encode rules like, do not harm humans, do not discriminate, and protect privacy. So this is where, you can actually have like some kind of forbidden actions here, like, you don't want to harm a human, steal data, discriminate. And then if one of these actions is kind of found, it's sort of, it basically just returns, that basically the ethical kind of filter is kind of applied, and one of these are kind of found, and it kind of violates the ethical policy. Again, it's a really kind of simple kind of demonstration, but it actually kind of goes to show that in Python itself, a lot of people use Python, but they may not actually kind of think about AI ethics. So the kind of point here is it's not to prove that these programs are absolutely fantastic. What they're proved and what they're intended to do is just kind of demonstrate a quick kind of, how could you actually get ethics into your AI program when you start to actually develop these programs. So, number 4 talks about, utilization, decision simulation, having a kind of benefit versus harm, right? So you can kind of go in here. Now, this one here, program 4, it's a bit more kind of maybe outside of the range of that we'd normally kind of do, but I've kind of left it in for the moment. And the fifth one is kind of where we talk about kind of bias detection, like fairness in AI. So you can measure fairness groups, okay? And you can sort of say genders, and if they're approved or not, and um, try and demonstrate whether one group is treated unfairly or not, because you're basically trying to kind of work out the kind of mean value here. So um, that's all the kind of programs actually do, and they're very kind of quick, very simple. Um, I've kind of checked them into the actual GitHub. So when you actually kind of run the program yourselves, obviously, kind of, my Docker here, what I've kind of done with the program itself here is, I've made a Docker file here so that we can kind of reuse this kind of Docker file kind of multiple times, and all it literally does is kind of pick up this app um, Python file here, and you can sort of see like there's a requirements file here to include the packages that we actually need. And if I go into the actual terminal here where I kind of ran it, so the first thing I did was actually kind of build it, okay, and then the next thing I kind of did was actually kind of run the actual program here, kind of using this command here. And again, all of the commands are actually in the file here. But you'll sort of see, so program 1 demonstrates you can detect a potential ethical problem. Okay, so democratic parity, equal opportunity, and you can sort of see the actual kind of differences between the two of those, right? So um, you can kind of demonstrate here how to encode a fairness goal. So this one here, like we were sort of saying, this is a very kind of very data scientist type driven, having a kind of ethical trade-off. Um, this one here kind of demonstrates about kind of rule-based ethics. Okay, so does it actually, does it violate your ethical policy here? Simple as that. This one here, program 4, demonstrates, utilitarian ethics. So it kind of just picks one option, which it feels is the correct one that it actually kind of should pick. And then program 5 kind of talks about, whether one group is treated fairly or not, and it talks about, the gender of a female versus male, and if kind of one is actually kind of approved of the other. So the programs themselves, they're very kind of data scientist driven. I'm not a data scientist, but it kind of just kind of demonstrates, the types of things that you could actually put into your own actual kind of programs for ethicals, and making sure that everything is aligned to your company. So anything before it's actually released, I think the kind of message here is anything before it's actually released, make sure that you've kind of just run it through your ethics department. And if you don't have an ethics department, just ensure that you've passed it by others to sort of say you've taken a bit of time to actually kind of think, are we actually going to discriminate against people? Are we going to treat people fairly? Are we going to make sure that the AI system does not kind of harm anybody, in a sense where psychologically, you don't want kind of people complaining about your system that it returns kind of very bad experience, and it was essentially kind of rude to the people. So you can sort of see when you kind of run these programs, they're little kind of demonstrations, but that's all I want to kind of show you today. And the next one we're going to move on. Okay, thank you.